So you're in the market for a used BMW. Do you get an E92 or do you buy an F30? Both of these are 6-speed manual 335i's with the M Sport package. Virtually the same, except their engines are different, the chassis are different, and this one has 2 doors. With virtually the same amount of power, you got to decide whether you want the older car that has a little bit more feel to it or the newer car that's a little bit more refined. Now, looks are all subjective. Ultimately, this is personal, but I think this is a beautiful car. I think this is a sexy car. But which is better to drive? Let's get behind the wheel of this, and we'll see. Before we get out on the road, let's clear the air. The N55 engine in the newer car is an evolution of the N54 in the older car. BMW knew the N54 wasn't reliable enough to continue production in the long run. However, many of its issues are very preventable in low mileage examples, and the twin-turbo design made the engine more desirable in the eyes of many, leading a lot of enthusiasts to still choose the earlier engine. So let's get this thing out on the road and see if it can match its bark with bite. The first thing you notice right from the start is how heavy the steering is, just in parking lots. This is hydraulic steering, as opposed to the electric steering in the other car. And it's heavy pretty much all the time. Both of these cars have the M Sport package, meaning both cars have M Sport suspension, which is a little bit harsher and a little bit lower than normal 3 Series suspension. In this car, it's a little bit softer than in the F30, but to me it seems more cohesive. It seems like the car feels like one complete package. It feels like almost kind of like a Miata, but with a little bit more comfort and luxury. Transmission feels amazing. The power delivery feels very predictable. Not much turbo lag, especially in these back roads using 2nd and 3rd and 4th gear. This car actually has a lower center of gravity than the F30. When they created the new generation, it was actually higher for whatever reason, and a lot of owners complained about that as well. This car does feel planted on the road. It does feel lower. I feel like I'm sitting lower to the ground. Now, the interior of this car is not nearly as nice. Still very comfortable, still luxurious, but nowhere near the luxury of the F30. And that's just because the F30 is 7 or 8 years newer, but that does not mean that this is uncomfortable in any way. With this engine, you can hear both of the turbos spool up very quietly, and in the N55, every now and again, you'll hear kind of a loud blow off from that single turbo. I will say though, the N54 engine doesn't sound nearly as good as the N55. The N55 sounds aggressive and meaty and mean. And this N54 sounds a little bit whiny at high RPM. Needless to say, the exhausts of these cars both sound aggressive and strikingly similar. Let's take a listen. Click on the eye icon on the top right-hand corner of your screen to vote on whether one of them sounded better or if they just sound the same. Now onto technology. If you're going to buy an E92, don't get the iDrive. That system was outdated and complicated, and I think the interior of this car looks much better with just a plain dashboard as this car has. Now let's go drive the other car. Now we're in the F30. Key differences with this car is it has the N55 engine, which is known to be more reliable than the N54. The suspension is M Sport suspension, just the same as the E92, except the difference with this is a lot of owners complain about how the rear suspension doesn't seem to communicate with the front suspension that well. And after owning this car for about 2 years, I would tend to say the same thing. Despite that one difference in the suspension, the car is still incredibly predictable and pretty communicative, with one exception, and that's the steering. The steering is electric steering. The E92 has hydraulic steering, as I mentioned earlier. 2 years ago, I reviewed this car, and I'll leave the link for that in the description. But as I said in that video, the steering really doesn't feel that great unless you're in Sport or Sport Plus mode. And that brings me to power delivery. The power delivery is about the same as the E92 335. Yes, the engines are different, but BMW has done a great job of keeping that feel about the same. The transmission feels identical to me. The shift knob is different, but apart from that, it really is the same. The clutch acts the same way, and the entire dynamic between your feet and your hands, apart from the steering, as I said earlier, is basically the same. Now, the F30 is more refined. It's quieter, the infotainment system is better, although if you're going to buy an F30, buy the screen upgrade, buy the technology package, it's worth it. You can't get an F30 without a screen, which I think is a mistake, personally, as an enthusiast. But I do think that if you're getting an F30, you need to get the upgraded technology package. Now on to really subjective differences. I think this car is sexier. The outside looks better, the inside looks better. It's a newer BMW. Now the great thing about both of these engines is you really can leave the car in third gear for windy roads like this. It has enough torque. Both cars, same amount of power. BMW just makes cars that are very easy for enthusiasts. It's why they're called the ultimate driving machine. So let's break this down. There are trade-offs. The E92 is older, but it feels more nimble. The F30, yes, it's newer, it's more refined, but ultimately it doesn't feel as much of a driver's car as the previous generation. Which do you buy? The answer to this question is neither. You don't get the gray car or the silver car. You get the 2011 through 2013 E92 with the N55. The better car, the better engine. So really, if I took either one of these two cars home, I would be equally as happy.